Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the February meeting of the Planning, Housing and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We're going to crack on through the agenda because we've got quite a bit to get through this evening. We have had apologies for absence from Councillors Linda Robinson, Bernard Sharp, Elise Wilson and James Wilson, Dr John Lamont, Dr Carolyn Wilkins, and we have some substitutes this evening. I'd particularly like to welcome Councillor Peter Malcolm, Councillor Adrian Pearce and Councillor Patricia Sullivan, who's here for her first meeting. No, she's not. She's not quite here yet. I'd also like to welcome Emma, who is subbing for Jen, who's our usual, Jen's our usual scribe for these meetings. Jen is not terribly well at the moment, so sending the committee's best wishes to Jen for a speedy recovery and welcoming Emma, who's here. Let's give her a good meeting so that she knows that this is the one to aim for rather than the other ones she has to do. I'm not aware of any urgent business, so does anybody have any declarations of interest for any of the items on the agenda today? No. Okay. Are colleagues content to approve the minutes of the last meeting dated the 15th of January?
Sorry, just a minor question.
Could you use your button, please, Councillor Walker?
Yeah. Do we have a code to get into the Wi-Fi?
We can deal with that, Councillor. I thought you had some burning issue with the minutes of the last meeting.
If you wait till the end, it will be a bit late.
Okay. If you turn your microphone off, Councillor Walker, if you're done, that'd be super. Does anybody have any comments or questions about the minutes, or are we content to approve them as a true record? Then I think they're agreed. Silence is compliance in that regard. We have a couple of outstanding actions which we'll go through. We're still awaiting a briefing note explaining the role of the new Strategic Transport Board. Colleagues will remember the Mayor announced this in a speech and came to us later that day, and we were very interested to hear some of the detail about that. You're indicating that you'd like to speak.
Just to update you, Chair, that there's currently correspondence taking place between the Mayor and Ministers over the appropriate attendance of the national transport agencies to the Transport Board, and once that's been clarified, we will then formalise the arrangements for the Transport Board and bring some advice.
Lovely, that would be very interesting. We were particularly interested in governance arrangements surrounding that, so we look forward to the detail of that in due course. A response has been circulated, or a paper has been circulated about the final response to the National Infrastructure Consultation, so colleagues will have seen that. Just to update everybody on where we're up to, we're sending a letter to the Secretary of State for Transport asking for more powers for Greater Manchester in terms of oversight and control of railway stations. I think we are dangerously close to agreement on a draft version which will be going out, and we will circulate this letter to colleagues when it's completed. Councillor Sherrington.
Yes, it's regarding the consultation, Chair, thanks. It's to do with the appendix that we've got with the questions and everything that's on it. And I was just concerned about the fact that it said that that Greater Manchester has always been an outward-looking city. I do think that that probably needs to be changed to region, and possibly, to, if they want to mention the city, to say that, that Manchester is the second largest city in the country. That might be more appropriate. That's all.
Thank you for that. I think that's something to take on board for future submissions, but my understanding is this is what has been submitted. Lovely, but thank you for that comment. You're quite right. Greater Manchester is a city region, and those of us from other boroughs are keen to remember that. One outstanding item that we as a committee need to do, we've been invited to send somebody from our number to represent this committee, the Scrutiny Committee, on the Housing Commission. Is there anybody, you remember City Mayor Paul Dennett came and talked to us about housing maybe meetings ago, I think, 2 or 3 meetings ago, and we have been invited to send a representative from this committee. If any member of this committee is particularly interested in that or would like to put themselves forward for it, I think it would be a really useful thing for this committee to be represented. So please do either signal now or let's have a conversation afterwards. But I think we should be represented on that committee. Okay, item 5 is the first substantive item on our agenda. It's the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. I'd like to welcome Anne Morgan, who is a familiar face to those of us who are regular attendees at these meetings, and Chris Findlay, who's the GMCA planning lead. We had asked right at the beginning of the formation of this committee, we knew that the GMSF was one of the biggest items that we were going to be looking at. It really is a huge piece of work that's being conducted across the city region, and it's something that we were mindful was going to take some of our time. We've had regular updates and briefing notes, which we're grateful for, and we asked for this to come to talk us through the timetable of the GMSF. We've received some presentation slides. Anne and Chris, I think Anne's going to lead on this to take us through the slides, and then let's take some questions at the end. So Anne, I'll throw it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. There are only a few slides. I think we're more likely to have a lot of questions. That was very loud, sorry. What I want to do is just run through where we're up to in terms of... Oh. Is anybody working there? Me.
There's a clicker.
Okay, thank you. Where we're up to in thinking around the proposed approach to the draft that's going to come out in June. What the thinking is around the proposed structure of that document. The work we're doing to try and widen engagement. If you recall, the Mayor was very keen that we widened engagement both before the production of the plan but also the consultation afterwards. What our timetable to June is, and then the ways in which districts, members and officers can be and are involved in the process to date. So obviously the approach to the plan takes into account all of the comments that we had last time, all of the issues that were raised. Clearly we had a Mayor in post since we went out with the last plan, and the Mayor has some very clear ideas around the way he wishes the new or the next version of GMSF to be presented, and I think a lot of that is around being much clearer about the narrative and what it is the plan is seeking to achieve, and that it's a plan for the whole of Greater Manchester, much clearer about the role of our urban land, the brownfield land we have, what we're doing to bring this forward and the challenges we have around viability, but I think trying to link it with some of our other strategies, particularly around the housing deal, the Housing Investment Fund and the Town Centre Challenge. I think there will be a much greater focus this time on places, not just our 8 principal town centres, but places generally and smaller town centres. And a big push to increase the amount of development we can get in our urban area by particularly looking at densities in centres, densities around public transport nodes, and that's something in terms of land supply that I was hoping we would have with us today. We haven't quite published that, but I think at the next meeting that would be a really important piece of work to bring with you, what land we think we have available for development in the urban area, what that looks like across the 10 and what the implications of that might be. That's an absolutely fundamental building block of the next strategy. Clearly there is a desire to reduce the amount of greenbelt that is released, if any, in the next plan. And this is not probably the Mayor's priority, but it's one for Chris and I and colleagues. What we do need to produce at the end of the day is a sound plan. And by that, I mean one which would get through an examination. So needs to be evidence-based, justified and deliverable. So that's all we need to do. What I just wanted to share with you, I'm now confused because I've got a different screen on there, put that down, was the way we're thinking about structuring the plan. So the last time there was quite a short introduction, a lot of policy chapters, and then a series of allocations, and I think the narrative about how the policies related to the allocations or why we were doing that was lost. So we're looking this time to have much more at the beginning of the plan that sets out the context of Greater Manchester, the context and issues and challenges in different places, the issues and challenges we're looking for the plan to help resolve, and the objectives that we're looking for it to deliver. And that's fairly standard. It's the type of work probably you do at a local level. We didn't do too much of that last time, so that will be a much larger part of the plan, which I hope will help you as members to understand the plan, but also you as members to be able to talk about it to local people. We're trying to make it as accessible as we can. We will then set strategic objectives that the plan is seeking to deliver. They were sort of woven in last time and not particularly upfront, but it will be clear what it is we're saying we want to do, and that people can, you know, judge whether or not they think the plan does deliver that. A spatial strategy explaining really the spatial development of Greater Manchester, where the priorities may be, how the spatial distribution of development delivers those priorities. And again, we did have that in the last plan, but not as upfront or as clear as anybody, I think, would expect it to be. Then there's a series of chapters, and here at the moment we've got 3 chapters, and there's a lot of different elements within them. I think there's subject to potential change. We may arrange things differently. What we would like you to look at and consider is, are we picking up and addressing all of the right issues? However they're arranged, I think, can happen later on. But if you think there is anything really significant missing from the issues and the subjects that we're looking to cover, that would be helpful. So we've grouped them around economic, the economic chapter, an inclusive Greater Manchester, which covers housing but is wider than housing. This will be much more the place type of chapter. So what makes good places? What do we need to say about design? What do we need to say about building standards in houses? All of those issues, which I think will be the heart of the plan, really. And then clearly an awful lot for us to think about and consider around environmental sustainability. So our open spaces, flood risk, you know, the green infrastructure, carbon emissions, all of those things. We're waiting with bated breath for the outcomes of the Green Summit in March, which will, I think, help us with some of those policy issues that emerge, and hopefully don't give us too many problems and challenges. And then probably the bit that everybody will look at first is the spatial distribution of development. And this time we will be outlining what land there is in the urban area. Last time that was in a background document and got a little bit lost, which is why I think this is a really key element for us to consider at the next meeting. What our preference is for development, how we want to have a preference for brownfield first, and then if we do need any allocations in the Greenbelt, that would follow on, but it would be clear why we needed those, because we had done everything we could with the existing land. So there then will be a section on implementation and delivery, which is clearly quite important. Won't be quite as substantive this time round because this is still a draft plan. As we move forward, that will have to get to be much, much more firmed up, particularly around delivery in the first 5 years. So last time, I think there was a concern. The plan landed out of nowhere. People were surprised by it. And then when they did know about it, they actually found it quite inaccessible, both in terms of getting onto the actual portal to read it, and then that there was a lot of information thrown at them that they found difficult to digest. So we're trying to address both of those things by trying to keep people up to date with the timescale, trying to make more information available before the consultation, particularly around the evidence, so people don't have to read 300 documents for the first time, just 200, and we've let them see a little bit beforehand. There will be a lot of information and there will be a lot of technical information, but we're trying to do that earlier so that we can then provide sort of signposting documents to people to explain it and then tell them where the more detailed information is. We didn't have that last time, and I think people did find that difficult. And then we're also trying to make sure, are making sure that the way we consult, we will still be using a consultation portal. We'll still be trying to get people to use electronic means. It's much, much easier for us, but making that easier for people to do so. And some of that is looking at how people responded last time, where we had the most responses by email or on the portal, and there was quite a geographic spread. I think we showed you those plans in the comms report last time. Generally the north of Greater Manchester, much lower response, so we might look at things like training library staff and trying to make sure that they understand the document, so when people come in they can guide them through it, but also maybe doing some sessions across Greater Manchester about how to use the portal, how to get onto it, just to familiarise people and make it as easy as possible for them to do so. We're also trying, as I say, to keep people informed, so we've got press releases going out and we've got bulletins if people are signed up onto the system to give them information if new evidence has been published. We've got an ongoing consultation and engagement with people who contact the mayor in particular, and then generally either the mayor or the portfolio lead will agree to meet groups that are meeting at a Greater Manchester level. If it's a local group, then they'll direct those to the district involved and suggest we meet there. But that's happening, and we're keeping a record of all of that, but that's happening on a monthly basis, 2 or 3 meetings every now and again. And as I say, we have made quite a lot of information so far available. We've published the consultation responses, we've published the revised economic forecasts, we've published our response to the local housing needs consultation. None of that probably sounds quite interesting, but actually it's very interesting. But what that is the evidence we will use to determine the level of development we think we need. And then the next big publication will be the land supply, and they're the 2 really key. You know, how much development do we need? How much land have we got to accommodate it? What does that mean? So I think they are really important pieces of evidence, and probably if you are willing at the next meeting, we could try to bring that together and say, this is what we think this means, and this is what will go into or underpin the next version of the plan. We're hoping to publish the land supply in the next couple of weeks, and then at some time, slightly unspecified in March, we'll be working with transport colleagues to produce or share some of the evidence and issue papers that we've been producing around issues raised in the last consultation, but also the work we've been doing to try and address transport issues generally and transport issues that came out specifically from the consultation. So, as I say, we are looking to make the narrative much stronger. We're working with Urbed, who are a consultancy, to try and say, how do you present that in a way that means something to people who don't work in this day in, day out, and who don't actually know what all of the terminology means. So how do we do that much more visually, and how do we test that? And actually, we have got a workshop with the Planning and Housing Commission at the end of this month. So if somebody is interested in attending the Commission, that might be a useful meeting to go to. We can circulate details of that. Councillor Dennett and Paul Dennett did ask me to raise that with you specifically. We are also working very, very closely with our comms colleagues, and they're working with your district comms colleagues. There are monthly meetings, and we'd be looking to have GM messages that we would be sharing with districts, and then working with districts if they wanted us to think about tailoring those to particular district issues or messages. We will have a draft comms and engagement strategy ready by the end of this month to share with you at your next meeting. We've had an earlier version of that, I think maybe last month or the meeting before that, but hopefully we will have that to share with you. And what we will do this time is make sure we coordinate the events across Greater Manchester so people can find in one place, not just what's happening in Wigan, but what's happening in Bolton, and make sure that if they miss an event, there's another event that they can go to. So, the timetable is quite stark from my perspective. We're aiming for approval for consultation at the end of June, the AGMA GMCA meeting at the end of June. We'll be intending to come to this meeting during the consultation in July. We won't be consulting on elements of the draft plan before June because we are consulting on the plan in June, but I think by trying to bring the evidence, that helps us as we're writing the plan, but it's also giving you sight of the key issues that we'll be taking forward into the next plan. And obviously there will be internal member briefings in your authorities depending on your arrangements. So we're doing lots of work centrally, but we are always involving our district colleagues, so you may or may not know that your districts are seconding people in on a part-time basis to work in the team, and the purpose of that is to give us some capacity, but also so that they take that knowledge back into the districts and can share it. Obviously, we've got our Planning and Housing Commission, only meets quarterly, but it's the members on the Planning and Housing Commission who are responsible to be taking that information and sharing it within districts. And I think that's why Paul thinks it's important to have someone from this committee at least attending if you'd like to get some of that information. And as I say, we have got the workshop at the end of this month. We do work really closely with officer colleagues across planning, housing, economic development and transport through a variety of groups that have been well established for many years to get that information out and into the districts. And obviously we will continue to come to this meeting every month and give as much information as we can as we are a standing item. Paul was also keen on stressing that the Mayor and himself will actually be then communicating directly with members once we have a final version, draft version, to discuss with you. I mean, we've got an unfortunate it's not unfortunate, but we've got PERDA and local elections in the middle of this, so normal meetings it's not unfortunate, obviously, but but that slightly disrupts our normal sort of schedule of meetings, so we will have to manage that sort of over the next couple of months. I think that's all from me.
Thank you very much for that, Anne. It's clear that a lot of work has been done since the first version of this landed, and I think you rightly identified some of the issues with the first version, and it's clear a lot of work has been done. Before I throw it open to colleagues, I suppose my first question is, what happens if one of the 10 say no?
Well, all 10 have to agree, so and there's 11 really who have to agree, and I think if any don't agree, then we wouldn't be able to go out to consultation. We'd have to look at the level of disagreement, whether it's something we could resolve if we went away for a couple of months and did more work, or if it was more fundamental than that. But I think it's clear that we do have to have unanimous support for it to go ahead to the consultation.
It might also be worth adding that whilst we're doing this, other things are happening. So we understand that the government will be publishing for consultation a revision of the National Planning Policy Framework, potentially at the end of next month. And it may also be confirming what the national method for calculating housing requirements may be as well. If one of the districts decided not to sign up, the issues won't go away. In fact, they could actually arrive in a different form and in an unplanned way. So that's just something to be aware of.
Thank you very much. Who has a question? I've got Councillor Sherrington and then Councillor Walker. Councillor Sherrington.
I know this is a little parochial, Chair, but in Bolton we do actually have a problem where we've got a major person within this area who is well known, you know, in Manchester. I'll say who it is and then you know who it is. But it's Peel Holdings, who are doing something in Bolton. And I know it's parochial, but they're trying to close a golf club and put houses on it. And
Councillor Sherrington, I'm just going to remind you, this is a public meeting which is being webcast.
I know that, I know.
And I just want to remind you of that while you're talking about a specific company and a specific item.
Right, sorry.
So I trust your judgment completely, but I just want to remind you it's a public meeting.
Right, okay. Well, the thing that I've got a problem with is because they're looking about putting something similar onto a greenfield site. And the situation is that I'm a bit worried in case this all comes up before July and we've not got something in there that can actually stop or whatever. You know, if it's agreed, it's agreed. But, you know, whatever might happen with these particular two planning applications. And I was just wondering, have we got something in there as a safety net so that so that it doesn't go straight to the planning inspectorate and it could probably come here because we're in the throes of, I'm not meaning this meeting, I'm meeting come to Greater Manchester Combined Authority. I was just wondering if it could come here, depending, you know, even if it's for or against, so that it's looked at somewhere else because of the fact we're going through this spatial framework. I don't know whether that's a possibility, but I just thought it might be looked upon by the public as being more fair, because it seems like they might be trying to get this done before other recommendations come in. Thank you.
If I could deal with that, Chair, thank you. I mean, I don't really want to go into the detail of it, but just dealing with some broad principles. My understanding is that yes, Peel have submitted a planning application at Bolton for a proposal which is Halton Park, which is a golf course with about 2,000 homes located in the Greenbelt, all tied into a potential Ryder Cup bid. So it is a major proposal in Greater Manchester. I know some of the detail of that. I understand that it is going to Bolton's Planning Committee on the 1st of March. And I think the important thing to say is that everyone has to follow due process. It is entirely okay for a developer to submit a planning application. The local planning authority has to consider the planning application and has to follow due process, and my understanding is that Bolton will be doing that. It is not for the combined authority or the Greater Manchester Mayor to particularly interfere in that particular process. Clearly, so far as the spatial framework is concerned, we may have to consider how we reflect what's going on in Bolton in the spatial framework, so we're not if you like, cutting across what's happening there, and we'll be talking to Bolton colleagues about that, and that's all I'd really say at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
But local planning authorities remain local planning authorities, indeed.
They do. The combined authority is not a local planning authority in itself.
Well, as
No.
I think our remit is broad enough already, Councillor Sherrington, for this committee, as much as we'd all enjoy looking at planning applications as well. Councillor Walker, you indicated, and I think Councillor Roberts as well. Councillor Walker. Please, could you use your microphone, Councillor Walker?
Strangely, mine's linked to that, although I think at probably a higher level, because what I'm recognising, that's only the beginning of the consultation. So that's actually step one in quite a long process before we finish up with a plan for Greater Manchester. And so I suppose what I'm looking for is an understanding of, because clearly we've all got local plans of one sort or another, and that's our current protection, if you like it, against developers, but in some cases they're failing. You know, we're seeing appeals. We had a report about some of the appeals that have been lost. And some of the grounds that we all thought were okay don't seem to be okay anymore. So I'm just trying to get a timescale on the eventual outcome of this exercise. So when will we have a framework in place? I'm guessing 2020. but I don't know. I'm hoping it's before that. But also, if you've got any thoughts about because the danger is that while we're doing all this, the developers are cherry picking all our sites on the basis that we haven't got an overall plan. So can you just expand on that a little bit? And also, if you've got an idea, that date when we might have this spatial framework in place.
Right. I think we could anticipate that the spatial framework would be adopted 2020, all other things being equal. So you're quite right on that. Well done. A statutory plan always takes time to produce because you have to go through, you'll be familiar with this, with various stages. There's an examination. It will be an examination plus so far as the GMSF is concerned, clearly. So it will be quite a long process. As a plan goes through process, it does tend to carry more weight, but it carries obviously the most weight once it's an adopted plan. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And yes, landowners and developers will continue to challenge. That will continue to happen. Salford has a major planning inquiry starting next week, I think set for 4 weeks. Same name as Councillor Sherrington talked about. The world does not stop while we're preparing plans. Clearly, where districts do not have a 5-year housing land supply, they are potentially vulnerable. And clearly there's always a lot of debate about how you calculate methodologies. Now the GMSF eventually will hopefully give us all a lot more certainty, but until it's finally adopted, we aren't there. This year, as I said, I think the government will be either publishing a final methodology or another consultation on the methodology. We don't know yet. At the end of March, hopefully, those are some of the signals we're receiving. We'll see whether that's right. But the intention of the government, and it's something actually I think we do support, is if you've got one national methodology, then the industry which surrounds how you calculate a 5-year housing land supply hopefully won't be so important. Although I'm sure there'll still be some issues to discuss and debate at inquiries. It's just a fact of life that while preparing plans, that will still happen, I'm afraid.
Councillor Roberts.
Well, there's a lot of things I could say, really. I think that there are some very clear perceptions about the Greater Manchester Strategic Framework. Whether they're correct or not is kind of beside the point. So there's perceptions that it's been a developer-led process, which derives from the fact that we put out a call for sites at the beginning of the process and then kind of went from there. There's a perception that this is about building on the Greenbelt, and there's going to be a big loss of green. This is what people think, that there's going to be a big loss of Greenbelt, and it's about, and that's all the reasons about, you know, why it's more cost effective for developers too, and all the rest of it, and all the issues that we've discussed here several times already around trying to ensure that we can actually use brownfield sites. And I think that there's a kind of a perception with generally of people feeling that they're being done unto by something or somebody that they don't know quite know who that is. Now, I think some of that might be overcome by the fact that in between the two versions, we've now got a mayor that people have voted for, whereas before Greater Manchester was pretty meaningless to most people, to be honest, as a body that did anything. So I think that that's a bit clearer. And so I think probably a lot of people's perception will come from the kind of leadership that we get from the mayor, which might not be a bit galling for some of the local authority leaders, but I kind of think that's a fact, really. So I think that there are some very clear things that we need to try and combat. And I hope, because I'm never quite sure what some of those headings mean, that what you've been saying to us is that we're going to be much clearer with people about why we're having to do this, what it's for, and how people will benefit from it. And I kind of think that just putting lots of abstract stuff in, even if the infographics is still quite abstract. So I think people need to understand who it is that needs housing, why we have to build all this housing. I think we've got to try and make a plan relate to people's life kind of experience, and that we have to try and go some way to convincing people that this will bring benefit to communities. It isn't just a threat. But I think we're really struggling because of the way the first iteration of this was done. So, but I kind of think that's something that really needs to be, this is a hearts and minds issue as much as it's a technical issue. And I know it has to be technical. And, you know, the ward that I represent, most of our Greenbelt is going to be built on under the first iteration of this plan. It did not go down well. People quite understood. They looked at the map and they could see that it was all going to be built on. So, you know, and that's all people needed to understand. So you've got thousands of people marching up a hill on New Year's Day because they could quite easily understand that. Now, if we're going to row back from that, and if we're going to try and convince people this is something, not that just we have to do it, but that it's worth doing because of the benefits it will bring to each of our local communities, I think we need to think very carefully about how it's presented and what we say to people, what a summary version of this might look like, how it kind of can you know, so you can understand that there are a lot of people in Greater Manchester who need better and different housing, and they could be your neighbour's children, but how do we get that across as a message, as well as all of those other kind of bigger things that, you know, and jobs as well. I mean, it's a lot about housing, but the kind of jobs that we're going to create for the future, sustainable, good jobs for the future for all of our communities. And I just think we need to be able to do that as part of this process, which I know is a really big ask. But unless we do that, we are going to find ourselves in a running battle of skirmishes against people who quite rightly say, well, why should we agree to this?
I think we recognise all of that, and I think we agree with all of that. And I think Anne's presentation was trying to cover a lot of what we're trying to do. I think as planners, the planning system is laden with jargon. So actually being straightforward about some of the key messages is really important. Planners aren't necessarily the people who are best at doing that, I've got to say. But I think you're quite right. The narrative in this document's really, really important. What we say out there is really important. I mean, I've stood myself in public meetings talking about these issues where people have been talking about the greenbelt and greenbelt concerns, and you're taking away our greenbelt, you're taking away our green fields. What's been quite interesting is the debates then actually got a bit more complicated, because also people standing up saying, but we actually want homes for the young people, because we don't want young people actually moving away from this area. And I think we need to get into that kind of part of the debate as well. We also need to be very clear in the plan that we actually have looked at all the issues. I mean, I think one of the criticisms of the consultation draft was about that thick. But about that much of it was about sites, and people immediately went to that. They didn't look at what had led to all of that, and because it was specifically focusing on the greenbelt sites, it was leaving the brownfield sites to the local plans. They were missing, so people couldn't actually see what the picture was in the round, and we're certainly trying to get that right next time. It won't mean, however, there won't be controversy. There will, I mean, I've been at my own authority's planning committee today, and there is as much debate about sites within the urban area as there is about greenbelt sites. Once you get into the practicalities of it, the same sort of issues around traffic and such like exist there, which you'll be familiar with. But absolutely agree with all the points you made, actually. Anne, do you want to add anything?
Sorry, Councillor Walker, I'd had Councillor Pearce and Councillor Sharp indicate first. Councillor Pearce, if I could bring you in, please.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, a couple of points, and sort of related to something that Chris Finney was saying there. One of our concerns in Tameside, which is because of its unique makeup probably, is that we've a lot of small towns, 8 of them, or probably more if some people define it in different ways. And almost without exception, they're towns which were based or fundamentally sprung out of the Industrial Revolution, with now quite large areas of derelict or underused or buildings and land. And it's around this assessment of that land and that capacity within those towns, because as my understanding was of the previous draft, was that the assessment was based on a pure sort of, and you can correct me on this if you like, on a basis of X amount of derelict land related to X amount of housing units. I think we would argue that that isn't necessarily the case, in the sense that with one of the strengths of the Town Challenge, for instance, is it interlinks the issues around housing, transport, employment, reducing retail importance in certain towns, etc., to produce probably far more land, but which isn't necessarily visible as derelict or underutilised, but in fact, in reality, if you know that town, it is. So my sort of question, that's my observation, but my question is, how on earth do we reconcile that with the plan, which where there's quite a lot of work ongoing relating to assessing and creating smaller plans, town centre plans to meet the the requirements and the exciting challenge, which is the town challenge as announced by the mayor. So I've got 2 more points. Affordable housing was a sort of a notable omission in the last plan, because we talked a lot about tenure size and etc. And what got lost, I think, was the need for affordable and a mixture of housing units and tenures. It was, it was very easy to sell the plan on the first draft as a sort of developer grab for luxury houses on the Greenbelt, which I'm sure we didn't do if we didn't want particular sites. But that was how it came across. Whereas I'm sure within the plan, it really was there was an element of implicitly implied in there, which looked at affordable housing in the round, but it wasn't expressed within the plan, and also there may be differences between authorities and the types of affordable housing or the percentages, etc., which different authorities want to put forward. How have you thought on how that might be resolved? And my final point is to welcome early member involvement, because I think as it was an interesting introduction to being a councillor was the dropping on us of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, so I can only thank you for that. But it did, I think what the lady said just now was around the sort of shock to local communities of seeing certain of their favourite sites earmarked for large-scale development, and often development which didn't relate to their town and which didn't relate to them. So I thank you for pulling that forward in the consultation process in this instance. Thanks.
I'll start. Thank you, Councillor Pearce. We timed it specially for it to be one of your first activities, frankly. In terms of the land supply, I think the issue you've raised around the capacity of sites and buildings and locations to deliver more housing is the absolute key issue, and that's why I think when we have the land supply information, that is something this committee really will want to have a look at. Last time and this time, what we have done is work with the 10 districts to collate the information that they collect, and they work on an annual basis at looking at what sites there might be available, what sort of uses might be sensible on those sites, what sort of densities those sites might be able to yield. We are hoping to have the 2017 database very quickly over the next couple of weeks and get that out as quickly as we can. What we then will do internally, we'll have a look at that and see what that looks like across the piece and how consistent districts have been, whether or not we think densities, particularly in certain locations, are high enough, whether or not we think districts have been ambitious enough. But what we're also looking to do is publish that so that members of the public and landowners or anybody else can look at that and can tell us you've missed sites, or you haven't been ambitious enough, or that site shouldn't be in there, and I think actually allow that scrutiny of that before the plan is out, so that you're not having to look at all of that at the same time as consider the plan. So I think it is really important that we get that information out, and I think that is the opportunity. I know there's a lot of internal discussion within Tameside at the moment about some of the sites within your land supply. I'm sure that's probably gone on in other districts, but I think we do need to get that out and expose that so that local people have the opportunity to see it and to see whether or not they think there are other locations that we've missed. I would be very happy if we had missed some locations and we had additional supply. I'd also be slightly worried if we'd missed lots and lots. I think it is done very rigorously at a local authority level. I think Adrian's point, Councillor Pearce's point, about the town centre challenge is really interesting. We have had a priority for town centres. We had it in the last draft. Every district's had a priority for town centres for a long time. And we are looking and seeing an increase in supply for housing coming forward in our town centres. I think there is an issue that most of the town centres don't have lots and lots and lots of sites currently sitting there. There might be a lot of small sites, or there might be a need to acquire land and clear land and make sites. What we'd be looking at once we have the baseline land supply, moving into the next version of the spatial framework, is where we can make allowances for land that we think might come forward, but that we can't currently point to sites. So we already do that around small sites, because very, very small sites aren't picked up by a lot of districts. but they do contribute to quite a lot of our housing supply. So we look and see what they've contributed over the last 5 years, and we put an allowance in and we add that to our baseline land supply. I think in terms of town centres, we may well do something similar, looking to say we've got a certain amount of supply already, but the town centre challenge over the next 15 to 20 years is going to bring forward more land. We can't actually identify exactly what it is now, but we think that there is a very strong possibility because of everything we've got in place that there will be more land. So I think that that's something we can probably pick up with you in more detail at the next meeting, but that's how we'll be dealing with the town centre challenge, because the timing of it is you know, for this next iteration of the plan, it's quite early. So I think what will be in there is sites we already know about. By the time we get to the next iteration, hopefully we'll have done a lot more work in some of those town centres, and there will be more supply coming forward. But we will be looking to see how we deal with that through allowances. Very quickly on affordable housing. We didn't have a policy on affordable housing in the last plan. We had a lot of discussion about a policy on affordable housing and not very much agreement about what that policy might look like. I think from a mayoral perspective, and certainly from the portfolio lead, there will be a different approach, or we will certainly be considering what an approach to affordable housing in GM might look like. There is still differences across each district, and each district will need to be comfortable that clearly whatever's in the Greater Manchester plan doesn't supersede what you do at a local level. So I think there will still be a lot of discussion about that, but certainly it's something we're currently considering. And I think we're not looking to impose a policy that means you don't do whatever it is you want to do at a district level, but I think the omission of an affordable housing policy was mentioned by several people.
Councillor Sharp, you indicated.
Yeah, my comments just follow on from Councillor Roberts and Chris Finlay. Seems quite a while ago now, actually, that you mentioned it. But the urban planning application issues that Chris mentioned earlier on were one in my ward, and it's not a parochial comment because it's an example in a wider context. But generally, people aren't stupid. They know there's a housing need. Though they might be a bit NIMBY and say, we know there's a housing need, but you're not building it next door to me. You can build it over there or build it over there. One of the things that I think is missing, and one of the comments that are usually raised within developments is, one, there's too much traffic on the road, or there's going to be more traffic, when the reality is that people move from place to place, so that traffic already exists. So we need to reduce that existing capacity. But in the framework, there's not really much mention of the infrastructural developments that come with it. So if we look at education, we don't see any sites. All you see is a big housing application there, another big one there, a big industrial park there, office blocks there, but there's never any, this is what we're keeping back for a school, this is what we're keeping back for a hospital, medical centre there, and we're looking at building another road that's going to come around there. And that has two effects, really. One, it allows people to see where those infrastructural developments are, so there is plans to get stuff in for people in the future. And two, it's no big shock when they say, we're building a medical centre there, people know it's coming. So I think we need to do a bit more work on how we present that infrastructure, because I know it exists. As a councillor, you're privy to some of this information, but to the public, it's a little bit more hidden.
And I think if I can just build on that point before I bring you in, for those who've been around for a while, there's often promises of the infrastructure that will come in the future, at some point in the future, and it never quite makes it. The lovely houses get built, but perhaps the sports centre doesn't come for whatever reason, and I wonder if you could just address that point, please.
That is an issue. Absolutely. I mean, we are doing a lot of work on that. I think on the larger sites, you know, so assuming we have very large sites in the GMSF, and those larger sites in the green belt are examples. Which ones, if any, are in the next consultation draft, we shall see. But if you have large sites, you can actually plan infrastructure in, and you can actually talk about what comes with the housing. So if you've got a site up to a certain scale, then you can say, for example, that particular scale of development generates a need for this size of school, primary or secondary school, and you can actually say that that's a requirement of the development, that land needs to be set aside for that, and maybe developer contributions towards that. Similarly with some of the transport links. More difficult is when you're looking at a lot of development cumulatively over time across an urban area, and trying to plan the infrastructure actually in tandem with that. And yes, there can be promises, and I know there can be frustrations because things don't happen in sequence. They never have done, if we're being absolutely frank about it. And some parts of that are actually really, really difficult, because in a world, for example, where we have effectively private companies running utilities working to 5-year capital programs, then they actually have their own programs. They're actually regulated. So we're trying to improve the way in which the fit between that kind of infrastructural development and the spatial development works, and there's a lot of discussion around that. We're having a lot of discussion around the whole issue of transport and transport infrastructure and what we say about that in the plan, because we clearly recognise that was a huge issue for people, and it was one of the chief concerns which people had. They've got that concern at the moment without any development. So obviously the concern was, goodness, it's taking me X hours to get to work from where I live to where I work. This is just going to make the situation much worse. So we have to be able to demonstrate that we're actually on top of those issues. What we can't promise is that we can make people's journeys instantly easier by putting in infrastructural improvements, because the world doesn't work in that way. And I think that's an issue, whether we have a plan or whether we don't have a plan. If we don't have a plan and authorities are losing sites at appeal, then actually the situation we have there then is potentially much worse, because what will be happening will be that sites will be being approved through the appeal system with no infrastructure on the back of them whatsoever. Because all that will happen will be that inspectors will apply the government tests. They won't be looking strategically. So we have got an opportunity in this plan to try and actually improve what we do and get it better. I am not going to guarantee perfection. That would be foolish.
But we should continue to strive for it, Chris, shouldn't we? 2 final comments from me, because nobody else has indicated, and we've got other things on the agenda. Oh, you tried to come in, didn't you, Councillor Walker? One final comment from you then before I wrap up. Please, could you use your microphone?
It follows on from Councillor Roberts' point. Let's try and use the word jobs when we're talking about spatial framework, because all the economic development, it doesn't carry the same. When you're talking in the pub about jobs, people get it right away. When you're talking about fancy terms, you'd lose half the battle. So please, the simpler the better. If we've got, part of our job is to do a sales campaign on this. People are realistic, your simple point. They know that they need houses, but they also understand, some of our old people that don't want any change at all, they understand about jobs. Our young people certainly do. So let's use jobs whenever we're talking about spatial framework, not just housing.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Walker. If you could, lovely stuff. Thank you there. So 2 final points from me. One is, how much has this all cost so far, and how much will it cost by the time, if it goes to the timetable that you put up there, how much will it have cost? And I think just if you could finish by talking about the maybe something about the context in which you're building this plan, particularly the rules set down by central government as to why this is the plan that's been chosen to work together as the 10 districts working together than the individual local plans.
How much the plan will eventually cost, we don't know. To some extent, that depends upon the degree of challenge as we move through the process. Length of examination, for example. Years and years ago, the government commissioned some work to understand the cost of plans. It was never published. I did hear, and I don't know the truth of this, of course, I did hear that it was suggested that your average local plan costs something in the region of £1 million. The GMSF will not cost 10 times that. Actually working together actually does involve some considerable saving. So it is actually more efficient and effective to do these major strategic things in this way. How much we've spent thus far, I'm not really sure about. But I think the general point that it's not a cheap process. But then planning inquiries aren't a cheap process. I wouldn't want to tell you what the planning inquiry that Salford's engaged in is costing Salford, for example. But actually, if you were to add up all the planning inquiries and the costs of those over a period of 4 years, you might be quite astonished. So actually, again, trying to get the plan in place, so we're not dealing with a situation of planning by appeal, I think is quite important. And I've lost your second point. It
was about the guidance laid down by government as to why
we're working. Yeah. Well, of course, it is part of the devolution agreement, but I think the government is also keen to see authorities working together, and it is very much encouraging that working together. One of the big problems within the planning system across England is where there isn't agreement between councils, particularly in areas which are, if you like, effectively integrated as places. And in a place like Greater Manchester, where, for example, the city centre isn't even in one authority, 4/5 of it is in one authority, 1/5 of it is in another. The regional centre is actually in 3 authorities. There are very clear relationships between the different authorities. So again, Bolton and Salford share logistics north, so there has to be quite a lot of joint planning. When you look at transport issues, the M60, which is so important to Greater Manchester, is shared by most authorities. So if you're actually trying to understand these issues and tie them all together, then actually doing it at a Greater Manchester level makes a huge amount of sense. It also means actually that it's more apparent to, for example, the utility providers what they have to do, because they tend to work at that kind of scale. Where you're trying to tie them into a local plan process, it's more difficult. It also means, I think the point's been made that the initial consultation draft was a complete shock to many people, but I think actually there will also be a growing understanding of how this works across Greater Manchester, and it's interesting that the groups who are concerned about the green belts in the green belt proposals in their particular areas have all got together. So, in perhaps a rather bizarre way, we're actually integrating communities in Greater Manchester in terms of their issues. Not what we intended, I have to say, but that's been a rather interesting outcome.
Goodness me, Chris, that's a claim. That is a claim to end on there. I think in wrapping this up, I'm going to echo a point that Councillor Roberts made earlier, which was about the first draft of this felt very much like it was being done to communities, not by communities. And I think it sounds like some of the work that's been doing is moving it more the other way, but it sounds like there's lots of work to go on that. So thank you for that. I'm going to draw a line under that item. We spent quite a while on it, but it is a very, very big, important piece of work that's going on for the whole of the city. Thank you very much for that. Item 6, the air quality plan. We've got 3 guests with us this evening. A returning guest is Councillor Alex Gnottis, who is the leader of Stockport Council. He is the portfolio holder for the Green City region. Yes, that's your correct title. We've also got Helen Smith and Simon Warburton from TFGM with us. Councillor Gnottis, I think, is going to introduce the item and we'll deal with any difficult questions, and then Helen and Simon are going to take us through the presentation. Councillor Gnottis.
Thank you. Well, when I last came to this committee just before Christmas, I talked about low carbon, and that's one of the main areas of my portfolio, and something that the upcoming Green Summit will be leading on. But the other broad area of my portfolio relates to air quality, and that's not carbon. That's factors that affect people's health, basically, in the air. Most notably nitrogen oxide, but also other particulate matters that get into your lungs and can cause long-term damage. The issue of air quality is a really, really pressing one in Greater Manchester. We estimate that every year around 2,000 people in Greater Manchester die as a result of poor air quality. So it's a very, very significant thing that we need to address, regardless of legislation and regardless of national issues. But the reason this is coming to this meeting tonight is because over the next 12 months or so, we have to put together an air quality plan for Greater Manchester that we will submit to government. 7 out of our 10 authorities exceed legal limits on air quality, and all those areas need to demonstrate a plan to government about how they will sort that out basically over the next 3 or 4 years. And that's what the presentation tonight will be talking about. Helen and Simon are 2 of the key officers on TFGM who lead on air quality. Just to make the point, air quality is the legal responsibility of individual councils. So if in a particular area air quality standards legislation are breached, it is the responsibility of that authority to sort it out. However, in Greater Manchester, we have delegated that role to TFGM. So TFGM will be leading on this air quality action plan and on its implementation, but the legal responsibility and accountability for it will rest with individual authorities. So I'll hand over to Simon and Helen to take you through this presentation, which will cover both what we have done to date, what the issues are in Greater Manchester, and importantly, what we need to do over the next 12 months and at what stage. And then we can have a more detailed, far-reaching conversation about anything that you want to on this issue and what it is that we need to do.
Thank you. So I think Councillor Gonnotis has effectively set the scene there at the national level. I was just going to take a minute to give you a little bit of context in terms of the situation in Greater Manchester. So I think it's important to stress that we recognise that air pollution comes from many sources. What I'm going to talk to you about today is quite focused in relation to the transport sources, and I'll explain why as we move through. But the current legislation that we're dealing with directs us down that road. That's not to say that we're ignoring other sources. They are being dealt with through different plans and in different ways. So in terms of emissions within Greater Manchester, the primary pollution of concern for us at the moment is nitrogen dioxide emissions, and you can see from the graph there that the majority of those do come from road sources. Wrong button. We also do have concern from an air pollution and a health point of view for particulate matter, and they're the small particles that Councillor Gonnotis mentioned that can get into your lungs and get into your blood system. And again, we can see that the majority of those come from road sources within Greater Manchester.
Helen, before you move on, for those of us who are not PM10 experts, could you explain what Part B's, Part A's and air mean on that chart?
Oh, sorry. So Part B's are from boilers, basically. So it's from your home energy system. Sorry, which was the other one you wanted?
Part A's and air.
Where have I got Part A's on there? Oh, right, I'm sorry. So again, they're energy sources. So that they come from your combustion through your home energy sources. And air is from air transport. So, yeah, aviation. So the current situation in Greater Manchester is we have an air quality management area. We previously had 10 air quality management areas across the whole of Greater Manchester, and in 2016 we elected to address this as a combined authority, and we redeclared our air quality management area, and we now have one. The diagram that you've got up there shows basically the pattern, so the areas highlighted in red are our air quality management area as of 2016. As Councillor Gonnotis mentioned, local authorities have a legal requirement to monitor and report on air quality within their areas, and if they have road links within those areas that either are or are projected to exceed nitrogen dioxide emissions, then they have to be declared as part of an air quality management area, and the local authority must develop an air quality action plan to address those. So this shows our current picture, and as I say, this is based on nitrogen dioxide concentrations. So in 2016, as a combined authority working with the 10 districts and led by TFGM, we published our low emissions strategy, which was an overarching strategy designed to align our carbon reduction and air quality ambitions. And we also published our latest air quality action plan. And the plan focuses really across 7 areas that you can see identified on the board. And already we're taking a number of steps to deliver interventions across all 7 of those areas. So just to touch upon some of those for you, there's a lot of work already that I'm sure you're aware of going on around transport infrastructure development. So obviously we've seen expansion to the Metrolink, we've seen rail electrification and capacity increases, electric vehicle charging network expansions across Greater Manchester. There's also a lot of work going on to improve the integration and the ticketing systems across the whole area. And there's been several improvements in terms of bus operations. So we've had infrastructure improvements you might be aware of the Lee guided busway and the Oxford Road corridor improvements. We've also then had fleet improvements from bus, so we've bid for and won several funding streams to improve our buses, both in terms of retrofit and procurement of new buses. Alongside that, we have also carried out a number of improvements or a number of schemes to implement cycle infrastructure, so road segregation for new cycle lanes, and also the development of a network of cycle hubs and other parking facilities. We have improved network management across the highway, so we have scoot systems which are designed to optimise traffic signals, and we also have a network of Bluetooth and variable messaging signs which can provide real-time information to help influence travel choices and behaviour on the highway. And also a big part of this is about providing more and better real-time data. So at the moment we're looking to expand our air quality monitoring network so that we have better real-time data, and we're also improving the platform that we use to disseminate that information. So we are developing the Great Air Manchester website, and we're making improvements to that so that becomes a much friendlier, stronger platform that people will use then to influence their behaviour around travel. 2017 saw the first Great Air Manchester Clean Air Day. So there was a series of activities working with schools, the community and businesses leading up to Clean Air Day, which was on the 15th of June 2017. We've already now started work on the activities and the development of Clean Air Day 2018, which is on the 21st of June. So please put it in your diaries now. There's activities take place in each of the local authority areas, and like I say, we do a lot with schools and with businesses across all 10 areas. Greater Manchester was the first city region in the UK to become a member of the Breathe Life Cities Network, which is a network that is run by the World Health Organization and UN Environmental. And we've committed to achieving or working towards achieving the World Health Organization's targets in relation to air pollution, which are lower than our legal limits. So obviously there's an obligation there for us to strive to go beyond just meeting the government's targets. We already go some way to doing that by the fact that our air quality management area is declared at 35 micrograms per cubic metre. The legal limit that we're required to declare is 40 micrograms. We do that partly to take account of any possible modelling discrepancies, and we do it also because we're very clear in our action plan that this isn't just about meeting legal targets, this is about reducing air pollution as a contributor to ill health. So I think that sets some of the scene about why we need to act and what we already have in place. That situation changed quite considerably with the publication of the government's revised national plan to tackle roadside nitrogen dioxide concentrations. This plan was published following a series of legal challenges by Client Earth against the government, and the plan was published in July 2017. Within it, the government set out, I think, 3 or 4 national level measures, but the largest part of the plan was placing responsibility or identifying local authority areas that then were required to take further action. So across the UK, there are now a total of 29 areas that are identified as required to take additional action. 7 of the Greater Manchester local authorities are within that list, and there are 11 road links within those local authorities that are identified. I'd stress that that is the current situation, so that is what is set out in the initial guidance from the government, and we're required to undertake detailed feasibility work to bring forward a detailed clean air plan which must be submitted to government by December 2018, subject to consultation requirements. I really do stress that those are the links that are currently identified. We have to go through what's called a target determination process, so that picture could change. What that process is, we do our own data collection and analysis so that we understand locally what we think that picture looks like, and then we go through a dialogue and we provide evidence to the Joint Air Quality Unit, which is made up of DEFRA and the DFT, and at the end of that process we will come to an agreed picture of what we think it looks like. Just to give you an idea now, and I'm sorry that that picture isn't very clear, can I stand up and point? So these are the links that are currently identified. Okay. So just to try and give you an illustration, going round from the top, so you can see the most clear link under the text is in Bolton. That's a stretch of the A666, St Peter's Way, leading into Bolton Town Centre. Moving round clockwise, we have a stretch of the A58 that's going east-west into Bury Town Centre over the bridge. Carrying on round, then the next link is in Tameside. That's a stretch of the A635, which actually stems from the junction with the M60, heading in towards Ashton Town Centre. Then we come round to Stockport, and we have 2 stretches along the A34 which actually join together, coming out from just inside the M60 and heading out towards the Cheadle Royal roundabout. Then we have, carrying on round, we have a stretch of Princess Road coming in from the M60 junction in towards the city centre. We have another stretch coming in from the M60 in Trafford, and that's the A56 heading in towards the city centre. And then actually within the city centre, the regional centre itself, we have 4 stretches along the Mancunian Way, and we have 1 stretch of the A57 heading Salford and out along Regent Road. So they're the ones that are identified by what's called the PCM model, the Pollution Climate Mapping Model, by the Joint Air Quality Unit. We will assess that and go through the process of identifying and agreeing whether those links are in and whether there are any more. To try and give you a little bit of context of what that looks like for those links, and bear in mind this is very high level information, it really is just to give a flavour of what that might look like and try and help people have some context. This gives an indication of, for each link, of the percentage reduction in nitrogen oxides that we need on each link, and the number of vehicle trips that might look like per day on those links. So we can see the scale of change that we need to be able to achieve those reductions is fairly significant on many of those links. This really is just to try and give an indication. There's obviously a lot happening around Greater Manchester at the moment. You've just obviously discussed for quite some time one of the real key pieces of work. There are many other things. Unfortunately, the timescales for delivery of many of those don't naturally align, but this is, I suppose, just to reassure the committee that we are doing all we can to work together and to make sure that any action in any of these pieces of work is complementary to and considers the others. So just to give you a bit of an idea about then how we're approaching the delivery of the plan, we have now a clear governance framework set up. So we have the Greater Manchester Senior Leadership Steering Group, which has representatives from director level of each of the 10 local authority areas and Highways England and Public Health England, and then the whole piece of work is ultimately being overseen by WLT and then the combined authority. Each of the local authorities then has their individual steering group, which oversees what we're doing from a more local level. The key milestone dates are that we have to submit the strategic outline case, the initial evidence and the evidence methodology to the Joint Air Quality Unit before the end of March, and they would really like to see that by the middle of March to give us time to have dialogue and make any changes that are required. The next key stage then will be the outline business case in August, followed by the full business case, which is due to be submitted in December 2018. However, if it's subject to consultation, which it's likely to be, we can go beyond that date. And just finally, this list are the short list of measures that are currently set out in the strategic outline case. I really stress that this is not the plan. This is the list of measures. So basically we start off with a very long list. We started off with a list of 96 measures that came from various different sources, and we researched examples from other cities, both in the UK and outside. We carried out workshops and consultation events with local authorities. The list of 96 then has what are called the primary critical success factors applied to them. Those success factors are the Joint Air Quality Unit, so they're non-negotiable from our point of view. And any measures that are seen to meet those go onto the shortlist. It doesn't take into account the cost of implementation, acceptability, potential economic impact. So please don't think that this is the plan. This is just our starting point for further assessment. And I've tried to break it down there into perhaps the elements that have charge or might be more punitive, and then the softer or supporting measures. The last point to stress is that the Joint Air Quality Unit and the government in its national plan sets out that for every link we must assess a charge-based clean air zone as the benchmark measure. And then we work from that to compare any other packages of measures that we put forward. So we will be assessing that for every single link.
Thank you very much. Councillor Malcolm, I've noted that you've indicated a couple of questions from me to start with. So first of all, thank you very much for sticking to the 10 to 15 minutes that were required. So thank you very much for that. 3 short questions from me. One is that is there enough monitoring, do you think, to give enough data to have a robust enough plan? I'm absolutely fascinated to learn how smart ticketing impacts on air quality. And then you talked a little bit about government requiring local authorities to take action. Can you talk about what that looks like? What powers exist to force action or to drive action, please?
So in relation to the monitoring question, I think the answer is that you can never really have enough monitoring. The more we monitor, the more we know, and that's great. We are working now on expanding our monitoring network, so we will certainly be in a strong position. We had a full audit carried out, and based on the findings of the audit, once we have implemented the changes we're in the process of making now, we will be in a fair position. So in terms of being comparable with the rest of the UK, we will be within reasonable tolerance, and we can always go further. A lot of what we do then is based around use of other data, such as bus fleet data, ANPR data, taxi licensing information, and then traffic modelling. I think Simon's going to pick up on the smart ticketing one. So just in terms of the government action, the national plan mandates local authorities to undertake detailed feasibility studies and to bring forward clear plans. Within the guidance, it then says that the benchmark measure that should be assessed is charge-based clean air zones. So there is nothing within the plan, and as far as I understand, there are currently no powers for the government to force areas to implement charge-based clean air zones.
What is one of those?
So I will bring you in, Councillor Roberts. So they can mandate a plan, but not the implementation of that plan. Have I understood you correctly?
As it stands, yes.
Okay. And Councillor Roberts had a question particularly on what you just said there.
What a charge-based, clean air, whatever it is, what's the thing is?
So within their previous plan, the government set out the concept of clean air zones, and those clean air zones are geographically defined areas where activities are focused on improving air quality and enhancing economic activity. As part of that, one type of clean air zone could include a charge base, and what that looks like according to the government guidance is that there will be a geographically defined boundary where any vehicle that does not meet a Euro Class 4 for a petrol engine or Euro Class 6 for a diesel engine would be subject to charges to cross that boundary.
Just to pick up on the issue of smart ticketing, so clearly what we are looking to achieve first and foremost is behavioural change in travel terms that works with people's lifestyles, and smart ticketing is a key element in terms of us breaking down the barriers for people switching from use of private cars to use of public transport. So what we've invested heavily in as Greater Manchester over the past decade is capacity across our public transport system, in the form of Metrolink first and foremost, but we're also now seeing a positive response across the railway in terms of rail capacity. We can now use smart ticketing to encourage people to switch those journeys across, to take away the confusion associated with paying for different ticketing regimes across the transport system. That's what we've started to do now within the Metrolink system. We will start to see a rollout of smart ticketing across the rail system through Transport for the North over the next 12 to 18 months. We have the basis of an arrangement in place across the bus system, and of course at present the Mayor's now exploring his powers under the Bus Services Act to potentially take that further over the next few years.
Thank you. Smart ticketing has been mentioned a couple of times in this committee, and I have a strong suspicion we will return to it as a subject in future meetings. Okay, I've got Councillor Malcolm, Councillor Sharp and Councillor Sherrington have indicated. Councillor Walker, I've seen you. Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to ask a question which might seem absolutely foolish, but as I'm a stand-in, I won't necessarily come to the next meeting, so I won't be embarrassed. But years ago, I mean, all the effort is, good luck with that, cutting down 12,000 journeys into Salford every day. Good luck with that, that is a challenge. But all the emphasis, obviously on the roads, is about the vehicles. 10, 15 years ago, probably longer now, we all fitted catalytic converters to our cars, where the dirty air coming out the engine went through the catalytic converter, come out cleaner, not clean, but cleaner. Is it a daft question? Is it not possible to build an industrial-sized catalytic converter which could suck the dirty air from these hotspots, pump it out and dilute then the NO2, the particulate? Because we've just seen Tesla build an industrial-sized battery which feeds Adelaide, and nobody thought that was possible at the time. That was just out-of-the-box thinking or whatever you might do it. Right? Is anybody thinking that way of actually cleaning the air, as opposed to, we all will eventually convert to electric vehicles? That's clearly is going to be a long-term thing, but not in the very short term. So is that a daft question, or has that been looked at? Or
I think the reality is that air pollution it's literally in front of your face. So you walk along the street and a car drives past you and it's there immediately. So the idea of having something somewhere that could suck all of this out of the air doesn't really seem like it's a feasible option before it came into any human contact. And just on the point in relation to cleaning the vehicle, so if you managed to attach some device to every single vehicle that automatically cleaned everything that came out of the tailpipe, particulate matter still comes from tyre wear and tear, from braking and acceleration as well, so you would still have that pollution in the air.
okay, thank you.
Councillor Sharp, I've got you next, I think.
If you do come up with that solution, it's probably a good thing, because you'll be either very rich or very assassinated very soon. So good luck. First question is on, one of two questions, is on a greater context on the required reduction in trips. If we take, for example, the capital of Greater Manchester, Salford, there's one stretch of road on there that has, is it 13,900 trip reductions we need? Just in the context, what is, how many is the existing? Because if it's 1 million, it's an easy task. If it's 20,000, it's near impossible, isn't it? I'm guessing it lies in the middle somewhere, though. And the congestion tax, I'm glad you didn't mention the congestion tax, because that one is going to create riots on the street, and I could speak on it first. I think congestion tax is more or less a tax on the poorest, to be honest, because it's working people that can't afford the new cars that are less polluting that are going to get the cost of the tax on this one. So I think most people will be very much against that in this room and outside.
And I think the congestion charge again has featured at some of our meetings before. I think when the Mayor came, he was clear that he has no intentions to try to reopen that Pandora's box, and that there will be no congestion charge suggestion from him, certainly in the short term. He was fairly clear about that. Did you want to address those points?
So just on the latter point, in terms of the clean air zone option and the congestion charge, a couple of things that I should really stress. One, a clean air zone isn't a congestion charge. It has a completely different purpose, and it's applied in a different way. So your enforcement strategy will be about compliance rather than trying to punish or charge motorists. It will be about getting people to travel differently and behave differently. And also in terms of the CAS options, just talking at quite a high level at the moment, we're necessarily talking about charging cars within that. So the government sets out a framework where vehicles are divided into different class types. So it goes from A to D, and in terms of cars would only be included in the final category, which is D. Now, we need to go through quite a lot of work to refine our data and our modelling, but at the moment, we certainly wouldn't be looking at going that far for Greater Manchester in terms of our initial assessments. On your question regarding the Salford trips, I'm afraid I don't know immediately off the top of my head the number of trips, but I know that we require a 19% reduction, so that doesn't necessarily apply directly across. It's not that we're looking at 5 times the number of trips, but it gives you an idea.
Okay, I've got 3 more comments or questions, I think, and I'm going to take them all together because I'm just mindful of time and the fact that somebody's got a 90th birthday party to attend. So Councillor Sherrington, and then I'm going to bring in Councillor Walker and Councillor Morgan. Councillor Sherrington.
Thank you, Chair. What it is, it's regarding the buses, and the thing is, I know that the government, it was the fact that the carbon that came out of diesel engines was less than petrol engines, so therefore it was like promoted that everybody gets diesel, and then they found out that it's the diesel that's poisonous. So there we go. But I was just very interested in what we're going to do with electric vehicles relating to the buses. I didn't know what GTL meant, so I don't know if that's something to do with that. I've no idea, but. All it is that I was just wondering whether you were going to, so that you could measure it better, have an area where you're going to just look at electric buses. So instead of saying, we'll do a bit all over Greater Manchester, you know, sort of saying, we'll choose a particular district and look at how it affects that particular district. So I was just wondering whether that is the idea, because I haven't seen a sort of general idea of what is going to happen. I can't see any strategy there regarding electric buses. Thank you.
I'm going to bring in Councillor Walker, who's going to use his microphone without prompting. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah. First simple fact, coming to this meeting tonight, I was on the guided busway. It was really good that every time we hit a queue, the engine stopped. So we weren't sat there ticking over, pumping juice into the air, and it felt particularly appropriate for tonight's meeting. Then we stopped on Princes Street, just opposite the town hall, for about 5 minutes, because I think we were ahead of schedule, and immediately it cuts out. There's no starting sounds or anything. It just moves off again. And I think that's a good message for a lot of people who are using public transport. Because when you first hear it, you wonder, oh, bloody hell, the bus is broken down. But after a bit, you just think, how sensible it is. But moving on to my question, which was, I've sat in your green map, with all your green bits are high intensity points. I've sat in queues in most of those and done my bit of contributing, but I've also sat in one which is the M6 in Wigan, and I've sat in that more than any, because it's always broken down, there, one breakdown and it overloads, and yet it's not in our map. And I just wonder whether it's because the map, the motorway was off the edge, or whether we were leaving that because it's Wigan and they don't mind.
Goodness me. And for those who are playing the drinking game whilst watching the webcast, that was another mention of the Lee-guided busway there from Councillor Walker. Councillor Morgan.
It's just a couple of comments, really. I mean, when it comes to public, there's a lot of cynicism when it comes to this sort of initiative, because we obviously spent decades trying to get people to use diesel cars, and now they've become the pariah of the roadwork. So, you know, we've got some convincing to do that, and now we're going to ban it. And also, really, it's not a lot. There is a bit small mention of taxis and Hackney cars and stuff, because they are some of the biggest polluters on our roads. Can we not use the licensing procedures to enforce the taxi drivers and the hackneys to at least go to hybrid sort of vehicles and get these older vehicles off the cars? Is there a move to do that across the conurbation, or are we going to leave that to the individual authorities to do that?
Thank you. So going back to Councillor Sherrington's point in terms of the electric buses, because of the timescales that we have to deal with this, we've got, you know, there's an impetus to have interventions in place by 2020. So the reality of implementing a strategy around electric vehicles during that time, especially for buses where the technology still isn't quite there yet, is unrealistic. So we're trying to join together our short-term approach, which might be around retrofit, particularly of older buses, and bringing them up to a Euro 6 standard, with then a longer-term strategy to move us towards a fully electric fleet by a date in the future, which I think is being worked on and will be picked up through the Green City Summit work as well. So absolutely, there is a longer-term strategy to get us towards an electric bus fleet, but it won't necessarily meet the needs of what we have to do to deliver our air quality improvements by 2020. In terms of Councillor Walker's point on the motorway network, yes, I've deliberately left the motorway links off there because they are Highways England responsibility. So that's not to say that we're not, you know, we're working very closely with Highways England. They are under a different mandate than we are, so they are working with the Joint Air Quality Unit as well to deliver what they need to do. We are fully aware of what the links are, and through our modelling process, we will be doing our own assessment as well of what we think those are and how they are influencing our problem. Because equally, whatever interventions either of us put in place has the potential to impact then on the other networks. So we'll continue, Highways England are part of our steering group, and we'll continue to work really closely with them. But it's just the links aren't showing on our picture. And regarding the taxi work, there is quite a significant piece of work now that's been undertaken. It's being led by TFGM, but it's involving all 10 of the local authorities, which is reviewing the licensing standards, not only from an emissions point of view, but also from a safety point of view. And the aim of that piece of work is to get standardisation across Greater Manchester, and indeed push for a level of national standardisation and control over how the operators work.
Thank you very much for that. I think that has done a good run round of all of the questions. Councillor Ganotis, would you like to just wrap up this item?
Yeah, I just want to make, mention a few points, because this is an issue which is going to, I think, come back to this committee a number of times during the course of this year. I should also mention that TFGM is hosting a session that I'll be attending at the end of this month for executive members in each of our 10 councils that have responsibility for this particular issue to start working through some of these issues. Now, the strategic outline case that we're submitting at the end of by the end of next month won't commit us to anything. It'll be a technical piece of work which just sets out what are the programme of measures that could be done, whether or not they're acceptable to us, and what would be the methodology for working out how effective they would be. And then later this year, when we look at the outline business case, that's when we'll start defining a package of measures and how they might work. And then the run up to that, I think this committee is going to be very important in terms of feeding back your views on the work that's coming up. So I would have thought the key period for this committee really is between March and probably the summer. Now, there are just a few things I'd quite like you to go away and think about. One is I think we shouldn't be shy of questioning at this stage what we're being required to do by the government, because this is an early stage and the government is still developing its thinking. So we'll comply with what we need to do in terms of next month's strategic outline case. But in my view, there's no reason why we can't also put arguments to government to challenge, to put some of the challenge back in terms of the national action that we need to see that will address air quality in a way that doesn't put all the onus on us. So in my view, it's not fair for the government to say we have a national air quality issue. Some of it is driven by national legislation. Some of it is driven by things that councils have got nothing to do, but it's wholly your responsibility to sort it out. I think that's wrong. So I think we need to push some of that challenge back. I also think we need to question some of the framework that we are being asked to work towards. So I don't think anyone here will challenge the need to bring down these nitrogen dioxide emissions and other particulate emissions down to the legal limits. But is this the most effective way of doing it? Because what we've done is we've honed in on 11 specific sites across Greater Manchester. Now, you could sort out air quality in a particular site by just banning traffic or halving traffic in that particular area. But if that just pushes the existing traffic onto neighbouring roads, aren't you then creating air quality problems that don't currently exist in some of those other areas? So I think that what we need is a solution that actually deals with air quality across the board in Greater Manchester and brings down dangerous levels everywhere, not just dealing with particular roads and then pushing the traffic elsewhere. So you create a sustainable situation for a particular road, but not for that area, then you're back to square one. So in my view, I think we need to put some of that challenge back. It's possible that hasn't been thought about, so let's think about that. Councillor Sharp, you mentioned earlier on the importance of not being punitive on those who've got least in society, which I absolutely agree with. But look at those areas on the map and other areas that aren't on the map but suffer from poor air quality. It's overwhelmingly areas of Greater Manchester that are socially deprived that suffer from poor air quality. So if you're having people that are driving in from wealthier areas or the outskirts of Greater Manchester into the centre of Manchester to work, to commute, all the rest of it, it's convenient for them. They've got cars, they can do that. Who's paying the price for the air quality that those cars are creating? Not the people necessarily driving them, the people that live in those areas. So what we have to do ultimately when we come up with the final plan is put inclusion and fairness and equality at the centre of it, because we know that the people's health who is being affected most by this are people who live in inner city areas and along main arterial routes. The big challenge that we have, I think, is that we have to come up with a plan that is feasible for implementation in 2020. So it's not a long-term plan to deal with air quality. A long-term plan would say something like, we need new rail lines, we need Metrolink extensions, to give people those feasible alternatives. Now, with the best will in the world, we're not going to deliver massive Metrolink expansion, new train stations, loads of new trains, massive numbers of new buses within 2 to 3 years. So I think we also need to be clear about, with government, saying, look, under your timescales, this is what's feasible, but under timescales that we're more comfortable with, that deliver this in a more sustainable way and bring down air quality levels forever in a more sustainable way, it will take us a bit more time, but you'll get a better outcome and you'll bring people with us. So in my view, I think we also need to challenge from those points. So I'm saying these things because it's not appropriate for Simon or Helen to say them, because these are political points. So we will deliver on what we are required to do by the end of the next month. But those are my views as to what we should actually be saying publicly. And just finally, it's really important, that slide that talks about joining up with other initiatives in Greater Manchester, especially the congestion plan, because we basically need all the armoury we can get to deliver this. So the congestion plan and the congestion work is particularly relevant because one of the big causes of poor air quality in those locations is slow-moving traffic and stationary traffic. So a busy road and an arterial road that has fast-flowing traffic has far less air quality issues than congested roads, even if they contain the same number of road vehicles. Speed has a lot to do with it. So we have to make sure that this is dovetailed with the congestion work. So in my view, we have to achieve, and it's right that we achieve the overarching ambitions here, but how we go about it, I think we have to have a particular Greater Manchester narrative, and importantly, it has to work for our residents.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gnottis. This is one of those issues that I think many of us would agree it's right that it's looked at across Greater Manchester. Air pollution, air quality issues don't respect borough boundaries, and so it is something that it makes complete sense to work together on. It's also something that I think will continue to rise up the agenda of importance, I think. So thank you very much for that. I think that was a useful trot around the issues there. Okay, item 7, the Greater Manchester Strategy Performance Dashboard. As often with these meetings, we build up to a crescendo for our later items. So John Holden, who is here, is the Assistant Director of Research and Strategy. We've received some papers on this. Would you like to introduce them before we throw it open to the committee for some comments, John?
Just very briefly, because I know these items split members. Let's say some people are really interested in them, some less so. I had a very interesting discussion with colleagues in the Economic Scrutiny Committee earlier this week about it. But members will remember when we came in October with the Greater Manchester Strategy Implementation Plan, we committed to having a full performance management dashboard and to consult members on the indicators which are included in that. What this paper does is sets out what those head and supporting indicators are proposed to be, and provides a mock-up of the dashboard of illustrating how you'll receive that data in April once we've done the assessment of performance. So I say happy to take comments now on that, or if people want to feed in comments over email over the next month or so before we do the full performance management assessment, that's fine too.
I am going to throw it open to comments or questions, but I'm going to encourage colleagues, if they've got questions about the data in here, to have a conversation outside these meetings. I think what John is really interested in is the format. Is this the format? Is the format right? Is that what members want to see? But also, are we looking at the right indicators? So no questions probably right now about what the indicators are telling us, but it's just, are we looking at the right indicators? Councillor Sherrington.
Thank you, Chair. I've looked at the framework and everything, and basically you can't find fault with it really, because it would be everything that we would like to have. However, I just wonder, you know, whether it's feasible, and you know, I'm just worried about the time frame. You know, there's things in there that I'm thinking about looked after children. We're talking about cutting them down, and yeah, I know it's rising and rising. So I just wondered, you know, how realistic some of it is going to be. That's all. Thank you.
Have I got any other comments or questions? Councillor Walker.
Yeah, simple one. It's very important that we're measuring apples and apples all the way through this, because it's very easy for Wigan to have one interpretation of a child's school ready and Stockport to have another. So I'm just and it's obvious really, but I'd like to think the officers, but if you don't start with that, you finish up with daft outcomes and stone throwing and inappropriateness that's won't get us anywhere.
Yeah, sure. I'll probably answer those in reverse order. So on the issue of consistency, yeah, absolutely. All the indicators will be measured consistently across all districts in Greater Manchester, and those definitions of those measures are agreed beforehand, because that is crucially important. And it's also important that we can measure Greater Manchester's progress against other parts of the country as well, and indeed internationally. So we'll be looking to do that. On the targets themselves and how realistic they are, they've all been developed in reference to benchmark areas and past performance sort of historically. I think there are questions about how realistic some of the ambitions that have been set out in the Greater Manchester Strategy are. So there's very ambitious targets around homelessness, for example, which we'll all be aware of, and looked after children is another example of that. The steer we had from leaders is that we should be setting out ambitious targets and working towards those, but crucially monitoring that performance and understanding where we're up to and how we're performing against those targets. So if, for example, we're not on track about looked after children, we're aware of that early, we're able to understand the reasons why, and then to start to set out the actions that we need to respond to that, to not being on those trajectories.
Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, I'm not a statistician, so I'm interested. So a lot of these are median figures. And I suppose one of the things I'm interested in is the gap between the top and the bottom of things. And so if we're always looking at median figures, does that help us to see whether or not we're reducing inequalities? So that would be, I don't know quite how it works, but I kind of feel that it doesn't really, if that's what one of our issues is about trying to produce somewhere that's more equal, where wealth and resources are shared and accessed more equally. And so a good example of that, which I'm not quite sure if it's ours or who it belongs to, the one by 2020 participation at cultural events and venues, the way I think that's worded could just mean that some people are going a lot more often, not that everyone's getting better access. So that's kind of an example of what I mean.
Really good points and agree with all of that. What we've put in place alongside this and the paper references it is we've been working with the Inclusive Growth Analysis Unit at the University of Manchester to understand how we can measure some of these disparities in performance. There was quite a long discussion at its meeting in October on the Economic Scrutiny Committee about how we measure inclusive growth and whether we want to have an individual measure of inclusive growth that brings it into one index. Speaking to the Inclusive Growth Analysis Unit at the University of Manchester, they were really strongly against that and said what we need to do is provide an analysis of the disparities between different groups and different parts of Greater Manchester, so by age, gender, ethnicity, all the variables that we're able to look at and do that in a more rigorous way. So what we intend to do alongside the 6 monthly headline updates is to provide what we're calling the State of Greater Manchester report, which will dig into more detail about how the performance has changed between different groups and different categories of people and places. I think we only tend to do that once a year because that is a huge exercise to look at that. So if you've got, we've got something like sort of 40 or 50 indicators, once you start breaking those down by different quintiles and different areas, different places, that spills into the thousands quite easily. So it's quite a big exercise. So we'll be doing that once a year. The purpose of the headline dashboard is to sort of summarise that down into a small number of statistics, which gives us a sense of whether we're overall we're making progress.
Am I right in thinking that it was agreed at one of the earlier scrutiny committees, or maybe it was just highlighted at one of the earlier scrutiny committees, that the data for each of the 10 boroughs will be at the back, and this is just the cover? So all of the data will be accessible, but this report, as you've just said, is a summary and drawing out some of the key indicators, I think.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's exactly, okay. I think this is a good way of displaying data, and I think let's have a go with it. I think this is all fairly new, and so as time goes on we might suggest some changes, and my guess is it's not all struck in stone, but I think to me it looks like a fairly clear way of displaying the data that we're looking at.
Yeah, that's right. And we said in the strategy itself is that indicators change, priorities change. We need to look at how it's working. Is it helpful in understanding performance or not? So yeah, I think the first one we do in April, we'll do it differently again 6 months later, and we'll iterate again 6 months after that.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed, John. Okay, item 8 is the work programme. Want to run a couple of suggested changes by the rest of the committee. We were due to have John Bland, who is the Treasurer and Deputy Clerk of the Greater Manchester Waste Disposal Authority, come to see us in March, and I want to propose that becomes a training session, so that's not an item particularly for scrutiny. Members will remember that the responsibility for waste does not come to this committee until after April, because the Waste Disposal Authority will cease to be and it will become a waste committee. A training item I think would be useful, but we've actually got a couple of fairly substantive items that I want to put on the agenda for March. One is further to the presentation we've had this evening on the GMSF. Anne was talking about land allocations and some of the information that she wanted to come back to us with. The more she talked, the more substantial that item sounded. So with the agreement of colleagues, I'd like to put that, as opposed to just being a briefing note or a standing item, that's going to be quite a chunky thing, I think. So I want to make sure we leave space for that. The other item is that homelessness. It's been mentioned a couple of times this evening as one of the really very important things, certainly that the Mayor's been talking about and that we all see in our own boroughs, as an issue that definitely falls in the remit of this committee. And I would like the agreement of colleagues to have this as a substantive item at the next meeting. In particular, I think we're into a bit of a rhythm of getting reports from officers, which is very interesting and worthwhile, but I want to try something a little bit different, which is bringing somebody with lived experience of homelessness in the room, and looking at things in a slightly different way, because I think we're a new committee, we're looking at things, we're setting the pace, we're setting the tone of how this committee works, and I want to try something with you of colleagues. Susan, is there anything else that I should be saying, particularly on that homelessness item, about who we're inviting to join us?
I think there was some people who were at one of the Mayor's question times that were really keen to find out what the work of this scrutiny committee did with as far as homelessness went. Obviously, it hasn't been on your agenda, your formal agenda. You've been, sort of working through your work programme, but it's always been there at the back of the. And this maybe seemed an opportune time. There is also a decision going through the combined authority in March on homelessness trailblazer. So, if with your permission, I'll work with colleagues and try and put something together that will, sort of answer this slightly different way of doing things, maybe.
Councillor Roberts, you'd indicated.
Yeah, what are we talking about? Are we talking about all those people in Greater Manchester who are on housing register who are homeless, or we're talking about street homeless people?
So, my understanding of it is those who are sleeping rough, so rough sleeping, because we could talk for days if we looked at the broader homelessness. So I think focusing on one area of it was my understanding of what the plan was. I've got Councillor does that answer your question, Councillor Roberts?
Yes, but I kind of think we just need to be really clear what we're talking about.
No, I agree. Councillor Sharp and then Councillor Sherrington.
Just like to second that proposal.
Councillor Sherrington.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering whether you wanted anybody to come to talk about the prevention strategy, because we have a very strong one in Bolton, where we actually do things with young people, housing them, who are homeless, so that they don't finish up being on the streets and so on, and get them so that they have a good future. So it's a combination of a lot of factors: getting used to paying bills, having somewhere to live, and all to get them into work or to college or whatever it is. But we do actually have that, and we do have somebody who leads on that, who is very good. So it's, if you ever wanted something down that road, because we don't want to create another generation, if you like.
Thank you for that. And Susan's making notes, and examples of best practice are always good to see. I think to Councillor Roberts' point, it is a very broad area, and we could spend days and weeks and months talking about this and still not get to the bottom of any of the elements of it. But I think it's to try and look at something and hear a different voice rather than officers of the combined authority. And I think if with colleagues' agreement, there's more nodding than shaking of heads, so I'm going to say that has been agreed. Date and time of next meeting. Councillor Walker, can you use your microphone?
As some people particularly asked about that, it is an open meeting anyway, so it might be nice to invite them along just to listen to the debate.
I think it's a public meeting, everybody's welcome to come and listen. No, but I think I'd particularly like to invite some people to speak, because I think that would be a good indeed. Right, if everybody's in agreement, we'll move on. Date and time of next meeting. I'd like to remind everybody that our location for the next meeting is at the Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Services Training Centre, which is Cassidy Close, M45HU, and we shall meet on Tuesday the 13th of March at 10:30. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.